Raghunath, are you ready for this?
What?
The wisdom of the sages trainings that are going on.
Where?
At the Eco Village, the Govardhan Eco Village in India.
Why?
To totally transform your life spiritually.
Who?
You, me, Radha Swami's going to be there. Other great teachers are going to be there. Lots of cool people.
How?
You go to wisdomofthesages.com/events. You find all the information there.
Haribo.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center, New York, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome to Friday. We call it Tell a Friend Friday. Tell somebody. You're in the midst of your spiritual awakening. Tell somebody. There's a lot of people out there that are sitting on a fence. They're confused. They're hungry for something, maybe a little depressed at the material world. Hey, that depression can be a catalyst for your spiritual life. Maybe take a screenshot of the show today, put it on your social media, tag us, send it to them perhaps. Say, hey, I think you'll really like this. I think, a lot of times people call me Kaustubha. They say, hey, I'm going through some stuff. I'm going through this. I'm going through that. The first thing I say is, have you listened to the podcast yet? I think it would be good for you. And I get a lot of turnover from that. Otherwise, it's like you can't hit all their questions. I think the podcast will answer a lot of your spiritual questions right here. Just show up, give it a week, once a week, every day for a week. See what happens.
Okay.
What do you think about that prescription?
Well, I think we don't work that way. We're just, someone gives us a piece of information and it solves all our problems. We kind of have to hear things again and again and contemplate in a certain context and share and question. And it's kind of like, it takes more of a process, and the podcast becomes like a process like that, right? Like a daily contemplation for a good hour.
Wisdom of the Sages every day. Yeah. It's not a pill. Our spiritual life is not a pill we take. It's it's almost like a little lifestyle change.
It's
just like now I'm going through my little cleanse, right? I'm doing a cleanse right now, and it's a little lifestyle change.
Losing weight, I can tell.
And you know what? Every positive action you take has a ripple effect, doesn't it? Like, I want to listen to the show every day. Because of that, I'm going to maybe I'm going to read a little bit every day, or maybe I'm going to adjust my diet
a little earlier,
right? Right, be a little bit more conscious when I eat or when I prepare my food, etc. Every conscious effort you take has a ripple effect for other auspicious things. I'm feeling that in my cleanse. I woke up. The first thing I did today is I just ran. I ran, just not much. I'm just easing back into my body. I ran for 10 minutes this morning, and I ran for 10 minutes last night. Okay. I feel good. I stretched out. I had Moses read to me Krishna book as I did yoga last night. I'm feeling good, people.
You got a new assistant over there.
Moses.
They went from Bunky to Moses.
Yeah.
All right. Moses is a good guy.
He's a great guy. I'm gonna
Hey, go get me some coffee, Moses. You're holding up your
I'm
cup.
burning through assistants. It used to be Mara. I remember when Mara was like, Mara?
That Mary used to come with the coffee and the mushroom drink.
She was every day, Mara.
Various.
That was the whole first year it was in the Sages, wasn't it?
Yeah. Something like that.
And before that.
Before it was Wisdom of the Sages.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive into this. We've got announcements.
We do. We have a Back to Recovery group meeting today at 1 p.m. and tomorrow's our Q&A day. So if people have questions that they want us to answer, they can write to us, wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com.
You know what else tomorrow is?
No.
Srimati Radharani's appearance day.
Oh.
Ooh.
Radhastami.
We should have a kirtan.
Those guys there are working.
I can't look at these guys. They're working.
No, they're working for me.
Mara's got a big wedding.
But
recruited Raghu's kids there also.
My kids are working. The devotees are working.
Normally,
anyway, you got to meditate on Radharani in your offering today when you're preparing the food, rolling whatever you're rolling, whipping whatever you're whipping, and just meditate on an offering to Radha. That's your instructions for today, guys. They're not even listening. Oh,
You
they are
know-
listening.
Normally, we would have a show more dedicated fully to that theme,
Yeah,
but
why
it's our
didn't we do
Q&A
that?
day. But you know, actually, someone asked a question that relates to Radha and her feelings of separation. So we can go into that question, and maybe that'll, who knows, we'll run wild with that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And another thing is we released our latest little promotional video for the autumn retreat, right? Up there on Super Soul Farm.
Yeah, excited for that. Our autumn retreat is up and we're heading out. And that's you got the dates for that, Kastuba?
7th through 9th of October.
7th through the 9th of October. It's our fall foliage retreat. Lots of hearing, chanting, studying, singing,
And most
Great
likely
food.
a very special guest, hopefully.
and a special guest. So hope to see you for that. And of course, space is limited and it's already filling up. And back to January's Wisdom of the Sages retreat, also filling up in India, 2 weeks, ending with the beautiful Flower Festival. Come join us. Go to wisdomofthesages.com and click on the events tab and come to India in beautiful Govardhan Eco Village. We're excited for that. We do it. We've been doing it every year. We skipped last year because of the pandemic. Yeah, we did it even the pandemic year. We did it 2020. That was the last time we did it. Remember?
2020 we did it, yeah. But
Pretty.
that's 3 years. That's a 3-year gap.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm excited. Let's dive into. All right, so we're gonna wind up our Thomas Merton week with the Thomas Merton. Was it a forward for the Bhagavad Gita or not a forward
Yeah, you know, it's
or an
they had-
appreciation of
they
the
had- they
Prabhupada's
call it-
Gita?
on the book. I think they called with like 3 appreciations from Allen Ginsberg, Thomas Merton, and who was that other person?
You said her name. I
We
didn't
had her
know
yesterday. Did you look her up, Mary, yesterday? Leslie something or other.
She was a British poet.
She's a British
Was
poet.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but so they call it's kind of like a forward though. I guess I would call it a forward.
Denise Levertov.
There it
was-
is.
yeah.
Denise Levertov. So he wrote a little essay, it's a few long paragraphs here that Thomas Merton wrote on the Bhagavad Gita. He wrote it specifically for Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, so he talks a little bit about Srila Prabhupada there too. But he talks about the Gita, and I think it's interesting to hear his perspective on it. And maybe this just becomes our show today. Let's see. All right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, ready?
I'm ready. Thomas Merton on the Bhagavad
Thomas Merton's
Gita.
goody nugget.
So this was from like the 1968 edition of Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is. I think it was the first one that they released.
It was
it-
Macmillan put it out.
Yeah, it wasn't on the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, which later would shortly thereafter would publish all of Srila Prabhupada's books. But it
It's
was,
pretty interesting.
Well-
Prabhupada came, did a translation of the Gita, got a major book deal.
yeah.
It's pretty very cool, isn't it? And then
Yeah,
they had
a
this.
lot going on.
I don't know how it actually happened. They probably got to this point where like we can distribute more just meeting people than we can like in bookstores, And then they just decided we're going to make these ourselves and started their own book manufacturing, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. Okay, here's Thomas Merton, the Bhagavad Gita. The word Gita means song, just as in the Bible, the Song of Solomon has traditionally been known as the Song of Songs, because it was interpreted to symbolize the ultimate union of Israel with God in terms of human married love. So the Bhagavad Gita is for Hinduism the great unsurpassed song that finds the secret of human life in the unquestioning surrender and to and awareness of Krishna.
Okay,
Well, the Vedas-
let's slow down right here. Let's not.
That wasn't slow enough.
Well, no, I'm just like let's just not just read it straight through because it'll get a little, wordy. But what I'm cueing in on here is that he's getting to the essence of the Gita. I like it. He was a deep person. A lot of people read the Gita and they don't understand really what it's all about. Right?
Yeah.
But he's saying that
yeah.
there's this love or this marriage or this harmony that the Gita is leading towards. That it has to do with. He says unquestioning surrender to, which that phrase may sound a little scary, but I suppose that's coming from his kind of Christian background. it doesn't mean that you don't after you question everything and your questions are satisfied, then you surrender unquestioningly. I think is really more of what it what it really means, but an awareness of Krishna. So in other words, that we should live in a state that's in harmony with the will of God. That's the idea. And even that sounds like like a triggering. But the idea is that there's like a pattern. There's a way that the universe works, wherein when you understand your role in it, and it's a very beautiful role, that you feel a sense of completeness and satisfaction and ultimately, bliss. And that harmony is where the Gita is aiming at.
At that time, 1968, it almost just seems so foreign to most people, especially adults. Like the counterculture was like, we'll take anything. We're open to anything.
Yeah.
But adults, their idea of surrender to Jesus, makes sense. I fully surrender to Jesus. I love Jesus. But when they say now surrender to Krishna, it's like, what? And then we got, what does that mean? I have to look like those guys on the street dancing, that smile painted on their face and playing. I don't think they played tambourines, but that's the stereotype.
Yeah.
But it's like that surrender to that. I have to become that to understand. No way. And then there's resistance and pushback, and they can't get through any of you got to think of it. There was a lot of cultural roadblocks for parents of that generation, which attracted primarily the counterculture, or they're sort of the youth who are a little bit more flexible. I think our generation, I'm 56, so our people, and even people in their 70s are from that counterculture generation now. So I think the world has just become riper to understand things outside the Western paradigm of normal.
Yeah, well, it certainly broke open in the 60s.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I think we're not as I think that generation, the boomers, I suppose you call them, right? They were ready for radical change in life. Radical change in the search of meaning. They were down for that.
Sure.
But I think, it was still a culturally different world. Whereas today, just the nature of globalization, the nature of Indian immigration to the United States and so on.
The information age, travel. Everybody travels.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I never traveled. I didn't get on a plane until I was 19.
Like an Indian, when we were growing up, was someone you didn't see in your school, and someone that it was a very foreign kind of thing.
Indian. Yeah, me too.
And whereas now, it's a people growing up are going to have much more familiarity with it on so many different levels. They might wear some Indian style clothes, and they may be familiar with Indian figures, and they may have even traveled there, or they may know people that if not they were born there, their parents were born, the children of immigrants and so on. So there's a lot more of that cultural exchange, and maybe it's not so alien or so foreign to people.
I know. That's why I think it's not like you have to downplay the culture. I think I think this generation and the generation above us, we're open to it. We don't have to. Ultimately, I think clothing is all external. It's what's in your heart and what's in your mind, and the way you see the world and treat people is what really makes a difference in this world. But hey, I'll wear a robe. I think it's cool. I think people think robes are cool, acceptable, wonderful. Wrap Mara in a sari. Looks pretty good, right, Mara?
Yeah, they're beautiful.
I look great in a sari.
Doesn't sound so convincing. You're like, yeah.
Okay, why don't we continue?
All right, let's dive back in this. While the Vedas provide Hinduism with its basic ideas of cult and sacrifice, already that's like another roadblock. Every American, what? Sure. Cult and sacrifice.
Cult wasn't I guess in 1968 it hadn't quite developed that connotation,
right?
At least for him.
And sacrifice might not. I always conjure up Santeria, like a chicken head, and anyway. And the Upanishads developed its metaphysics of contemplation. The Bhagavad Gita can be seen as the great treatise on the active life, right? Okay. Active in this world.
So he's doing his study and he's picking it all up. You have the 4 Vedas, and they deal with the ritual, like recognizing the gifts of God and expressing gratitude for that in the form of ritual for the purpose of living a better, more quote unquote holy life, you could say. And then the Upanishads, they start to develop a different level of thought, the metaphysical level, metaphysical contemplation, you say, right? It involves more renunciation. You see both of these within the Christian realm, and I'm sure he could kind of like see the parallels, that they're
Sure.
mystics, they're mystics within the tradition that want to understand the nature of spirit and so on. So the Upanishads are more leading in that direction. What the Gita does is it takes that metaphysical mystic contemplation and puts it alive in what Merton here calls active life, in being a person of this world and being a parent and being a spouse and being a, in terms of your occupation, in terms of your social roles, that you take that metaphysic contemplation and you apply it in this world. The Gita does that like no other book has or probably ever will ever do. It is the book for that.
I'm sure a person educated in Christianity and hanging out with a bunch of monks, it's different than like the Christians. I never hung out with Christian monks. I did go to church every week, but I didn't ever meet a monk. So I think a person with his education in Christianity and with his renunciation and him hanging out with the people he hung out with, right?
Yeah.
Then they read the Gita and it's a whole nother book, or they read the Vedas and it's a whole nother book. They have another view of it as opposed to just an active life Christian in a small town in America. And then you meet these Eastern people and they seem like from a whole nother realm. So he was a great person to like comment on this, and he was very broad-minded. He wasn't fanatical. He was just the opposite, very inclusive.
And it's interesting you say that. I think it may have been the same for me too, that the monks were cloistered in Catholicism, whereas within that Vedic context, they were wanderers, right?
Right.
They
well,
would
I mean,
wander
we
through
have
your village.
ashrams. We have ashrams of monks,
No question.
Ashrams of monks, but yeah, our sannyasis or our paramahamsas, our
They're
wandering
travelers.
mendicants. But I'm sure they travel with assistants and disciples.
But my point is that you would meet them and they'd come into your village and they tell you some stories, and which even plays out, like today, that the sannyasis commonly will, fly into town and speak.
Yeah. I romanticize about ancient India.
You want to wander?
I want to wander. I want to welcome wandering people into my home. Welcome,
that's nice.
Swamiji. Let's continue on.
Okay, this is what I'm really preaching about Merton. He recognizes that important point, and an academic will pick that up. And he was an academic in a sense, that the Bhagavad Gita can be seen as a great treatise on the active life, but now he goes deeper into it. He's seen the deeper spiritual essence to it. But
it is really something more, for it tends to fuse worship. We're talking about the Gita. Worship, action, and contemplation in fulfillment of daily duty that transcends all three by virtue of a higher consciousness, a consciousness of acting passively, of being an obedient instrument of a transcendent will.
Very interesting, right? Acting passively. What I believe he means by that is, in more of like the Eastern circles, they would say acting with detachment, right? That I'm not acting based on any selfish desire. That's passive. I'm acting in this world, but as an instrument of transcendent will. That's where the Gita is going. It's really interesting when you get the Bhagavad Gita starts with Arjuna saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's the right path. Tell me what to do, Krishna, right? And at the very end, where it ends is that Krishna turns to Arjuna and says, you've heard everything that I've had to say. And now it's up to you to do what you want to do. You've heard me out. Now
Quite amazing.
What would you like to do? Yeah. And then he says, now all my illusion is gone. I'm no longer confused. My attachments to the things of this world, my confusion about I need this or that to be happy, that's all gone. Through hearing your words, my illusion is now dispelled, and I'm ready to act according to your will. Right. And this is the big flip-flop in a sense, that we were talking about yesterday.
Big flip-flop. Goes from a me-centered universe
There you
to
go.
a God-centered universe.
Okay, so that's what I think Merton's picking up on. Is he's saying that you read the Bhagavad Gita and it's combining. He's using the word worship, which I think is also a triggering word. I think really that worship has to do with like an affectionate appreciation of the position of the divine, right? It's not necessarily like a submission of one's own independent, well, a submission of one's own value or worth, you know, but it has to do with like kind of like naturally affectionately connecting with that root or with that source, a natural appreciation that can be expressed through ritual, it can be expressed through action. So he's saying it's combining these three. He said worship, action, your social roles that you play, and contemplation, that it's not action done through the force of one's senses, but it's like there's a deeper contemplation on one's identity. There's a deeper contemplation on the nature of the realm that we're in, and there's a deeper contemplation on God. And you know, with all of that going on, you act in this world, not for your own selfish motives, which is our natural tendency, but as an instrument of the transcendent will.
Mara, this might be a message for your workers in the kitchen today, preparing for the wedding. Acting passively as an instrument of transcendent will while they're rolling the chapatis in there.
Let them know, Mara.
Let them know. And this is, well, truthfully, it's sort of like, this is why we're hearing now. So that when we go into the kitchen, we go into the workplace, right? We go into the yoga studio, whatever we do for a living, we go into our artwork or whatever we do in the course of the day, it's now infused with the divine consciousness. And that's going to come out in our art, in our labor, right? In the cooking itself. And think about, what if I go into that kitchen with like just an angry mind? I'm hurt. I've been hurt. I play on loops, pain and revenge and spite in my mind. I've been up all night angry, right? And I take that into the workplace. I take that into the kitchen, into my art, into my relationships with my children. Everybody is affected from my from the consciousness. So
that's, yeah, it's like one unhealthy cell in the body, it starts to spread its disease, right?
Yeah. Okay, continuing on. The Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Gita can be seen as the main literary supports for the great religious civilization of India. It really was a great religious civilization.
It's a great civilization.
A great civilization. The oldest surviving culture of the world. Pretty amazing. The fact that the Gita remains utterly vital today can be judged by the way such great performers, reformers, as Mohandas Gandhi and Vinod Bhav, both spontaneously based their lives and actions on it, and indeed commented on it in detail for their disciples. Who's Vinod Bhav?
I think he was kind of one of Gandhi's followers. He was a contemporary of Gandhi. He commented on. I think he translated Gita into Marathi. He was a popular figure there. But yeah, he's getting it. Of the three, although these are all great and important works, of the three, the Gita remains utterly vital. You can't say that for most of these books. You can't say that the Upanishads are utterly vital, in public life,
because there is a public workforce in India that's keeping India together, more than sadhus and renunciates.
Well, and because that the Gita's message does not require renunciation of the world.
Yeah,
and even the way that the Vedas are alive in Indian life, like there's puja going on everywhere and so on, but it's not like as vital as he's saying here, right? It's not like it's not leading, the way that it played a role in Gandhi's life and the way that played a role in the history of India. And in so many ways, the Gita is vital.
The present translation and commentary is another manifestation of the permanent living importance of the Gita. Swami Bhaktivedanta brings to the West a salutary reminder that our highly activistic and one-sided culture is faced with a crisis that may end in self-destruction because it lacks the inner depth of an authentic metaphysical consciousness.
That is a great statement.
They're
David.
really trying to kick God out of the picture nowadays, aren't they?
Well, yeah, I mean, and so whether it's God, I mean, he didn't exactly limit it to an understanding of, let's say, like a personal God, right?
But even they're trying to kick spirit out of the picture.
That's the point.
Even
yeah.
just say, we believe in science. We believe in science. We believe in science. Hearing that so much, are you really believing that much in science? How much problems have science how many times have they gone, we've got this all wrong. This DDT is affecting humans as well. Or everything, all these pesticides and herbicides are spraying. There is a ripple effect of problems that are created with our water tables, with it killing the bees or destroying the environment. So it's sort of like, trust the science. You better be careful because they're always updating that every 10 years or so.
Yeah, whether it's science, whether it's politics, whether it's even like he'll go on next, right? The next, let's read the whole thing again. He says, Swami Bhaktivedanta, that's Srila Prabhupada,
Okay.
brings to the West a salutary reminder. Do you know what salutary means?
Oh, you trying to nerd me out here?
Well, you're the word
No, I
nerd.
don't. It means a glorious.
No. It's
Okay, that 3 no's mean I was really off base. 1 no is like close.
it means it brings good effect, but especially with reference to something unwelcome or unpleasant.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, so he brings a salutary reminder that our highly activistic and one-sided culture is faced with a crisis. Hey, this is what we talk about, the adult in the room, right? The Brahmana, saying, you're all thinking about making money. You're all thinking you're making technological progress. You all think you're making social progress. Everyone's, you think everything's moving a progressive direction. But actually, don't you see how things are also falling apart? Someone's got to stand up and say that, So he's bringing this reminder that our highly activistic and one-sided culture is faced with a crisis that may end in self-destruction because it lacks in this here. Let me tell you what's lacking, right? It's lacking an inner depth of an authentic metaphysical consciousness. Can't you see that spirit is behind everything? Can't you see that we're not these bodies, that we are spirit? Can't you see that satisfying the body is not the goal of life, and that the blind pursuit of that leads to self-destruction? Then he says, without such depth, all right, without that authentic metaphysical consciousness, our moral and political protestations are just so much verbiage. And to me, that also, in other words, all that we're so caught up in and so passionate about, all of our moral ideas and all of our political protestations, whether it be on left side or the right side, they're just so much verbiage because you're missing the whole point, right? You're blind to the fact that we are all brothers and sisters, right? That we are all
really
made of this.
Very loudly today, these words from 1968.
They really do. Yeah, we're missing that point. Without that what is the authentic metaphysical consciousness? Again, let's not let that be something that's so vague and ephemeral or fluffy in our mind that we can't get a hold of it, right? An authentic metaphysical consciousness is recognizing, or at least recognizing the possibility, right, that we're not these bodies, that consciousness is something that is not a product of matter, that the spirit within me is of the same nature as the spirit that's within you, is of the same nature of the spirit within the animals and within the trees and within the earth itself, and that wherever we see that spirit, it must be respected, it must be honored, that we can't exploit it blindly for our own selfish purposes. And when you do, it leads towards destruction. And the fact that you're discovering new things in terms of science or discovering new things in terms of technology, that doesn't cover that. That doesn't make up for that. You may discover, you may be able to create the iPhone, and you may be able to create television, you may be able to create rocket ships, but if we don't have that metaphysical, that spiritual consciousness, it will lead to self-destruction. And we see how it's not solving our problems, how we have more anxiety than ever before, how how suffering is not disappearing, even though technologically we're making advancement, or socially we're changing, and we think that that's going to solve the problems.
Okay, I'm going to continue on here. Without such depth. That's where we are.
If in the West,
God can no longer be experienced as other than dead, right? That was a big thing in the 60s. God is dead. It is because of an inner split and self-alienation that have characterized the Western mind in its single-minded dedication to only half of life. Nice. That which is exterior, objective, quantitative. That's our science. I can figure it out. I can find its. I can objectify it. I can measure it.
And it's all it's all looking out and not looking. He says exterior, right? It's all looking out, never looking in.
The death of God and the consequent death of genuine moral sense, respect for life, for humanity, for value, has expressed the death of an inner subjective quality of life. A quality that in the traditional religions was experienced in terms of God consciousness. Not concentration on an idea or concept of God, still less on an image of God, but a sense of presence, of an ultimate ground of reality and meaning from which life and love could spontaneously flower.
Okay, so we don't all have to necessarily share the exact specific idea of who we think God is. But can we sense a presence, that there's something that's tying all this together, that there is a spiritual essence that we all are derived from, right? That he's calling an ultimate ground of reality and meaning, from which life and love could spontaneously flower. Now we get to the part that we read yesterday.
Want to read it again?
Okay.
Can we read it again?
Yeah.
Realization of the supreme player, whose play, or lila, as it's called in Sanskrit, is manifested in the million-formed, inexhaustible richness of beings and events, is what gives us the key to the meaning of life. Once we live in awareness of the cosmic dance and move in time with the dancer, our life attains its true dimension. So beautifully written. It is at once more serious and less serious than the life of one who does not sense this inner cosmic dynamism. To live without this illuminated consciousness is to live as a beast of burden, carrying one's life with tragic seriousness as a huge, incomprehensible weight. See Camus' interpretation of the myth of Sisyphus.
The myth of Sisyphus.
I never read that. Did you?
It has to do with rolling a rock up to the top, and then it rolls down back to the bottom. You turn around, you roll it back up. This is what life is. It's just drudgery. Is there any meaning to it?
Camus ended up. I think, Camus was a great thinker too. I think he ended up. Is a problem. We don't have God. We just think of like life is just a burden, and then we're trying to like fabricate some purpose, but it's actually just we're creating it in our life, and we're just creating it in our mind, and ultimately there's nothing. Life is just nothing, and we've taken on different roles, and we try to add meaning to it, but it's ultimately nothing. It's a very depressing outlook on life, that life is nothing, this existential view, and it's a trap that a lot of great thinkers, philosophically minded people fall into, because there's a lot of previous masters of nothingness that you can like read their literature, opt into their philosophy, and it's quite depressing.
Well,
I think Camus himself committed suicide or drove off a cliff or something. Look that up, Camus. How did Camus die?
But Thomas Merton, he's going to get to the essence of it in the next sentence.
The weight of the burden is the seriousness which one takes one's own individual and separate self.
So it's this nature of feeling that I'm not part of something bigger. I'm the separate individual. And then you experience suffering. And if you're living as a separate individual, you tend to act in ways that bring about more suffering. And then the whole thing becomes so tragically serious.
That's right? Before the flip-flop. It's about me. It's about me and my needs and my pleasure and my joy. And then next thing you know, it just becomes an extreme selfish thing. And I'm dealing with other people who are trying to meet their needs. And then we're just naturally bumping heads. And then, of course, there's my problems. With all my work to get my stuff, now there's my problems. And, oh, what am I going to do about this? And we make everything much, much bigger than it actually is. We're really just blades of grass, Kastuba.
Huh.
We're just like little
part of a
blades
big
of grass
lawn.
in this world.
It's a beautiful blade.
Yeah.
Mayor, how
Isn't it
did-
interesting to think? I used to think like this as a teenager. I used to think like this was my justification for skipping school. Because I used to skip school and go fishing. This was my thing. I'd be like laying in the grass thinking,
You're like, who are you? Like,
Huck Finn.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's like you're painting a fence while you're at it. Is that?
I used to just lay in the grass and I used to think,
Skip school and go fishing. Did you have like?
here's what I would
Did
say.
you have
Tell-
like
tell me what you
a
think. This is one
reed
of
of
the-
like one of those things in your mouth? Like
Yeah, sucking on straw.
Okay.
I'd lay in the back, daisies growing up by my ears, and I used to think
What
the
is wrong with you?
1500s, right? Not a long time ago in the scope of time. How many people can I even remember from the 1500s? Mara, give me 3 people from the 1500s.
What about Lord Chaitanya?
All right, 1600s. 1600s. I want 3 people quick.
Christopher Columbus.
And she's quite educated. Christopher Columbus, no, he's the 1400s, but maybe he
Oh,
lived
yeah.
Well, he sailed in 1492, so he
Yeah,
probably
you're
made it.
Okay. My point is, Mara's quite educated, and yet still she's struggling. She's pulling out Lord Chaitanya and Christopher Columbus. We're not even sure. But the idea is, can you name 10, 20? How about if I said 100 people? The problem is in the 1400s, 1500s, there were millions of people all around the world. Then there's people who weren't famous that just get unrecognized. Columbus sailed across the ocean. Lord Chaitanya was an avatar, but can you name like the villagers? No. We are like tiny little blades of grass who even the great people, the Beatles of our time, they get forgotten in 300 years, 100 years, 400 years. Therefore,
Mhm.
who's going to remember me?
A little rugged.
And who's going to care if I skip school today in the big scope of time? That was my first transcendental thought of a teenager.
How did your mother respond to that logic?
She didn't know.
No, she never
She
found
didn't
out.
know. She
Did the
did
school
not
get
know.
back to? The school didn't get back. You had some fake note or something.
Fake notes.
Okay.
Anyway, it's important to see, and that's part of what Merton's saying. It's like not seeing ourselves as this isolated. We're part of something much, much bigger. We're not a separated being. And anyway, I'm not saying skip school. That's not my message today. My message is we are so tiny.
Okay, and not just tiny, but the point is tiny, but part of something large and beautiful.
Right.
But if we see ourselves as separate from that, then the tininess and the hugeness of suffering, of potential suffering that we create for ourselves, becomes overwhelming, and life can seem meaningless, like it's just drudgery.
Well, the problem with my little philosophy there is when I see myself as very tiny, I can think that life is insignificant. The fact is my life is very significant because I'm a spiritual being. So therefore, this resurrection of my relationship with my higher power, that's the most significant thing. This is when we're actually in union. As a matter of fact, my philosophy mixed with sort of like ego, a guy with a big ego, they're sort of like the same thing. I am nothing and I am everything. But what we're trying to say, and what Merton's trying to say, is we are part of something bigger, and to reconnect, this is where we find our significance.
You know, even the studies they do, like there's that famous Harvard study where they kept going back to people over the course of like 50 years or more. You're familiar with that one?
It depends which one. They've probably done that for a lot of
There's
things.
so many Harvard studies that I'm familiar with.
No, where they go with people and check over 10 years or 20 years.
No, not 20. I mean, this is a very long. It was a famous study done at Harvard that had to do with happiness, and what makes people happy. Like you get a wide group of people, and you're looking at their income, you're looking at where they live. You're looking at the different circumstances in their life, and trying to develop what are the patterns that that lead to one's happiness. Or to
I
one's
don't know this,
unhappiness.
but can I guess a couple? Is purpose one of them?
Well, there's from what I
Purpose,
understand,
community.
it had a lot to do with community.
Hmm.
It had a lot to do.
It's
So
a
in
great
other
thing. What
words-
we're doing here live on Zoom, people, and the others out there, this is a big thing. Getting together, even our little these retreats, these pilgrims, it's building community. It's fostering deep relationships that last much longer than the event we're going to.
And so, I think Thomas Merton, he's cluing in on this. It's the same. Obviously, he's commenting on the Gita, but this feeling of separateness in a greater existential kind of level, right? Like my purpose. What do I exist for? I exist for satisfying my body and satisfying my mind. If that's my formula, the opposite of the flip, that's what you flip flop from, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's my existential understanding of who I am, this is why I exist, then we are doomed for suffering. And as we make this technological progress, we move more and more in that way. And this is why, and I want to say this with like a sensitivity for people that suffer. But, therefore we're on medication, like medication is like out of control. Therefore we're on Xanax and Prozac and all these different things, it's like fundamentally we're not understanding who we are or why we exist. And that one fundamental misunderstanding, it just like, it grows and it manifests, in greater and greater ways. It expands and it becomes our life. Where really like being happy shouldn't be such a difficult thing, right?
Mm.
It has something to do with like recognizing I'm part of something bigger and I'm sensitive to others. Then you begin to kind of like, you can feel not only comfort and happiness, but you can overcome the problems of life with support and begin to see meaning in it all. And the Gita is pointing us to understand that.
I was just thinking about this morning too, within our bhakti too. And sometimes we're in the romance, we're sort of dating Krishna in the new times. And then we've been with Krishna for a couple of years or 5 years or 10 years. I find that the way people stay active in their bhakti is not just get initiated or chant my rounds, because I think they need to find an active community to contribute to, that they feel like these guys are doing something good. I want to contribute to this community, and find a community where you can lock in and be a part of and help support and find out what your contribution is specifically.
That's why we got to start,
because everybody's got unique talents. It doesn't necessarily mean financial contribution. It could mean you're the person, like I know, we have Ariana and David always come over and do some landscaping, or Banjo Mike and Michelle Berger come over to the farm and contribute somewhere like that. So find the community that you connect with and be part of it and say, this is what I want to do on a regular basis. I want to do this. Hey, let's make it official. I want to do this on a regular basis. And that little bit of contribution, whether it's legal work or planting flowers or cooking or some type of contribution, something where you feel you're part of something bigger and you're helping a greater cause, we find our significance from that. And we want to go and we find, and we don't go through this sort of existential sadness that comes with who am I in this world. Even people who are gone through the process of an initiation and chanting, they'll just still feel like disconnected. Why am I doing this anyway? What difference do I make in this world? You make a difference, but that's why we push community and we wave that flag, because it is an important thing towards not just our spiritual growth, but our just overall joy in this world.
That's why we got to get Sage Engage going, Raghunath.
Sage Engage.
Yeah.
That's our dating app. Sage,
No.
You're engaged.
That's your idea of Sage Engage.
Wait a second. I thought this was the Seva program. Nope. It's a combined.
We've got some for you
it's
right here.
Arranged marriage app. You clicked the wrong button. Did you ever do that sort of like buy now on Amazon Prime? Like, no, I made a mistake. I meant put in my cart.
Raghunath,
Press the wrong button on the app.
we're not going to be able to cover this entire thing in the time.
And we didn't even do the Bhagavatam, brother. But it's all the
No,
Bhagavatam.
we knew. I had assumed we weren't going to. But this is going to. He gives a couple long paragraphs to the question of violence in the Bhagavad Gita. being sometimes misunderstood, or he's saying, you know, there's a question, especially he was writing during the Vietnam War, but seeing the Bhagavad Gita as a book that's justifying violence in the name of God. And he argues against that a bit, that that's not what this book is about. Which is, you know, again, there was that show, you weren't there that day, Ronald, but when we had the spiritual scientist Chaitanya Charan on, where we went into detail on the Gita, and he just had a really interesting way to say that violence is absent in the Gita in terms of its content, context, and consequence. But he spoke
Say that
really
again, in content,
content, context, and consequence, and he went through each one, you know. But like there he spoke about, like, in terms of context, what is the Gita really all about? What is its context? Is it about this war? You know, when every time that Krishna encourages Arjuna to fight in the Gita, he's actually not telling him, he's standing in the battlefield, he's saying, now Arjuna, armed, you know, he says that armed with yoga, stand and fight, right? But he's not pointing at anyone on the other side. He's pointing him within. You know, he's asking him, he identifies an enemy to Arjuna. It's not Duryodhana, right? It's not anyone, it's not Karna, it's not anyone on the other side of the battlefield. He identifies the enemy as kama, you know, which basically is selfishness, right? Like selfish desire. That's what he identifies. That's what he's saying. That's what you need to stand up. That's what you need to fight against. And again, at the end of the Gita, Arjuna doesn't say, okay, now I'm ready to fight. He says, now I'm ready to do your will, right? That's really what it goes. So in any case, there's a lot of good answers to that reasonable question. Is this justifying violence in the name of God? But maybe we should skip down to the last paragraph where it concludes and read that with our time that we have remaining.
the last paragraph. Okay.
Yeah.
The Gita sees that the basic problem of man is his endemic refusal to live by a will other than his own.
That's what we've been talking about, right? Yeah.
Or in striving to live entirely by his own individual will, instead of becoming free, man is enslaved by forces even more exterior and more delusory than his own transient fancies. I've got transient fancies, Kostuba.
We're transient fancies from.
We're opening for the Pixies tonight. Transient fancies. He projects himself out of the present into the future, and he tries to make for himself a future that accords with his own fantasy, and thereby escape from a present reality which he does not fully accept. And yet, when he moves into the future he wanted to create for himself, it becomes a present that is once again repugnant to him.
This is very interesting. In other words, it's like saying, slow down. You're making your technological progress. You're making your so-called social progress. You're earning more money. You had a fantasy of where your happiness would lie, and it lied in all these externals. We're doing this individually. We're doing this as a society, right? And he's saying, but then when you have a fantasy about what the future holds, then you get to that point where your social and political changes have been made. You get to that point where you're making the money, or you've invented or created what you thought would be. But when you get there, what happens? When it's no longer fantasy and it becomes reality, then you moved into that what was the future, and the present that you're in, that also becomes repugnant to you. You're not happy with it. It's created more problems, and you're still thinking. Now you have a new fantasy, you know, in your mind, and you're thinking, I need to move towards that.
Okay. And yet this is
so he said, and yet when he moves into the future he wanted to create for himself, it becomes a present that is once again repugnant to him. And yet this is precisely
Jinx, what he has made for himself, his own karma. In accepting the present in all its reality as something to be dealt with precisely as it is, man comes to grips at once with his karma and with a providential will that ultimately is more his own than what he currently experiences on a superficial level as his own will.
Okay, let's read that again. In accepting the present in all its reality as something to be dealt with precisely as it is, right? Living in the moment, right? Not fantasizing about a future. Man comes to grips at once with his karma. This is where I put myself. I'm responsible for it. Let me be aware of my situation right now. And with the providential will, that I was brought here for a purpose, right? Ultimately, that is more his own than what he currently experiences on the superficial level as his own will, right? There's something deeper going on right now than how much money I have, what apartment I'm in, what car I have, what mate I'm going after. There's a reason how I got to where I'm at, in terms of my own actions, and there's a reason how I got to where I'm at in terms of providence, or in terms of God's will. And if I can own that, it's far more real than all this constantly changing ephemeral stuff where I'm just constantly in a state of fantasy and desire.
Do we have time to keep going? It's
Yeah,
6:58.
let's finish it. We
Okay.
can finish it.
It is in surrendering a false and illusory liberty on the superficial level that man unites himself with the inner ground of reality and freedom in himself, which is the will of God, of Krishna, of providence, of Tao, of Tao. These concepts do not all exactly coincide, but they have much in common. It is by remaining open to an infinite number of unexpected possibilities which transcend his own imagination and capacity to plan that man really fulfills his own need for freedom. The Gita, like the Gospels, teach us to live awareness of an inner truth that exceeds the grasp of our thought and cannot be subject to our own control. In following mere appetite for power, we are slaves of our own appetite. In obedience to that inner truth, we are free at last.
Right? It's counterintuitive, right? But like surrendering to that will is actually what grants freedom. Otherwise, we're slaves.
What do you think of all the other Trappist monks were saying, oh, here goes Thomas again? Do you think they thought he was off course?
I don't know the history of that, but that tends to be a common pattern. We could look into it.
Mara, did you have any nuggets for today? Little nugget goodies?
Got some takeaways.
Oh yeah, takeaways. Takeaway goodies. Takeaway.
Our spiritual life is a lifestyle change, not a pill.
Not a pill, man.
Okay.
Every positive action has a ripple effect.
Really does.
Act passively, be an instrument of transcendent will.
Be an instrument.
Flip-flop from me-centered to God-centered.
Flop it. That's my t-shirt. Flop it.
Align worship, action, and contemplation.
Align worship, action, and contemplation. All
right. Infuse your work, art, and relationships with divine consciousness.
Divine infusion. Hey, we're Divine Infusion from Tallahassee.
Recognize authentic metaphysical consciousness to avoid self-destruction.
That was it? That was the last one?
No, I know I got more.
Okay.
We're just tiny blades.
The way that your intonation there threw me off, Mara.
Sorry. We're just tiny blades of grass.
We're just tiny blades.
We're tiny blades of grass.
Nobody will remember us.
Find a community.
Do whatever you want.
Skip school. It's fun. Go fishing.
Find a community you can contribute to.
Yep.
Yeah.
Being happy shouldn't be so difficult.
You got a lot of stuff here, Mary.
And who's going to care in 300 years if I skip school today?
Who's going to care in 300 years if I skip school today? Okay, that's a t-shirt right there. Kids, it's time for school. I hope you weren't listening to the show today. Thanks everybody for joining us. Wisdom of the Sages. Hey, if you like what we're doing, keep this boat floating. This has become like a full-time engagement for our minds and our services. If you like what we're doing, it's a community-supported podcast. Go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages. Give whatever you can. It helps us keep going. And thanks for everybody joining us live on Zoom. Join us live on Zoom too by going to Mara at Wisdom of the Sages 108 at gmail.com, and she will give you the secret codes to enter our chambers. Thanks for everybody. We're hoping to see you at the Wisdom of the Sages retreat in upstate New York at Super Soul Farm, as well as India this year, July 14th through the Flower Festival. Super exciting. All those events that were going on, including the Bhakti Recovery Retreat. You can go to wisdomofthesages.com, click on events. Beautiful day to see so many committed people just showing up on a regular basis. I find it inspiring. I get weak and I get lifted up by this community. Thanks, everybody. Hands in the air. Sing with your heart. Expect the magic to flow. It's real.
All right.